Greetings again to our Reba Church community and to the wider Immanuel Approach community. We love you. We miss you. We miss your faces. We miss your smiles. We miss your hugs. Welcome back for another teaching segment about the Immanuel Approach. So in the previous teaching segments, I talked about the Immanuel truth that God is always with us. I talked about relational circuits, how there are circuits in our brains that serve as the neurological hardware for running relationships, and how it is much easier to connect with each other and with the Lord when these relational circuits are online and strongly active. I talked about how we can reliably, predictably, consistently get these relational circuits online and strongly active by recalling and reconnecting with the positive memory, and then by deliberately generating, stirring up deep gratitude. I talked about how we can establish a living, interactive connection with God by inviting God's presence into the positive memory, asking God to help us perceive His presence, and then noticing what comes into our awareness. I talked about how our relationships are memory mapped, how our relationships are carried in memories. I talked about how reconnecting with the memory will recreate, at least to some extent, the same brain-mind conditions that were present for the original experience. And I talked about how using positive memories that include a connection with God will take advantage of these two pieces of brain science. I talked about how our brains are designed to work best in community, how describing our mental content out loud to another person helps us to feel its importance and to recognize its meaning. And I talked about how including this piece in our Immanuel prayer will enable us to perceive subtle manifestations of God's presence that we might otherwise miss, and also enable us to recognize and receive subtle interactive content coming from God that we might otherwise miss. And finally, I talked about and demonstrated several different options from receiving help from God. We can receive God's comfort and peace by talking directly to God about our distress, and then by experiencing the truth that God is with us in our distress, that God is listening to us, that God hears us and understands us, that God cares about us, and that God is glad to be with us. We can receive God's help by talking directly to God about our distress and then asking, Lord, what do you want me to know about this? And we can receive help from God by connecting with God and then just spending restoration time with the Lord for respite and refuge. Now, this week, I'm going to talk about basic Immanuel Approach troubleshooting, about how we can find and resolve simple, common blockages that can sometimes hinder our ability to connect with the Lord. First, I would like to start with some foundational principles regarding Immanuel Approach troubleshooting. Tens of thousands of hours facilitating, hundreds of hours receiving, and careful study of Scripture have totally convinced me that the Lord is always with us. The Lord has been present with us in every past experience, and the Lord is present with us now. And my experience with the Immanuel Approach has taught me that the Lord always wants us to be able to perceive His presence, connect with Him, synchronize with Him, receive from Him, and be with Him. The Lord always wants to establish an interactive connection with us. Therefore, if the recipient is not initially able to establish an interactive connection, I assume that there must be something in the way. Fortunately, my experience has also taught me that these blockages can be identified and resolved, and that when we do this, the person becomes able to perceive the Lord's presence and to establish an interactive connection. I therefore work very persistently to expose and resolve any blockages, and in almost every situation, persistent troubleshooting eventually enables a person to be able to perceive the Lord's presence and to establish an interactive connection. Sometimes troubleshooting can be easy and quick, as Charlotte and I will portray in our roleplay. But it is important to realize that troubleshooting can also sometimes be complicated and slow. My own experience provides a good example. I had to identify and resolve a whole series of blockages over the course of many sessions before I began to perceive the Lord's tangible presence and to experience interactive connections. In this teaching segment, I will only have time to talk about and demonstrate the simplest, most basic troubleshooting tools, but there is a much larger toolbox that can be employed when necessary. For example, the whole of chapter 13 in the Big Lion book talks about basic troubleshooting tools for people who are having trouble establishing an interactive connection. And half of chapter 26 talks about intermediate and advanced troubleshooting tools for people who are having trouble establishing an interactive connection. So I just want to name this. Some of you may have more complicated blockages and therefore may not be able to establish interactive connections with the simple, basic exercises and troubleshooting tools that I have been explaining and demonstrating in this teaching series. If you are one of the people who are not able to establish interactive connections with these exercises and troubleshooting tools, that's disappointing. That really is disappointing. I get that. I spent decades as a Christian without ever experiencing the presence of God in any tangible way. And as just mentioned, I spent many sessions working through a whole series of blockages before I was ever able to experience interactive connections with Jesus. However, if you are not able to establish interactive connections with these simple, basic exercises and troubleshooting tools, that does not mean that God does not want to connect with you or that you will never be able to connect with the Lord. It just means that you have blockages that are more complicated and that require more advanced troubleshooting. I really, really, really encourage you to persist. I implore you to persist. Find an experienced troubleshooter and keep working until you find and resolve your blockages. Again, the really short summary is, God is always with you and always wants to connect with you. If this doesn't happen initially, then there's just something in the way. And when you find and resolve the blockages, you will perceive God, and you will experience a mutually interactive, contingent connection with His tangible, personal, living presence. So now, I will explain, and then Charlotte and I will role play a common, basic Immanuel approach troubleshooting scenario. One of the most common reasons a person fails to connect with God is that God is manifesting in some subtle way, and the person fails to feel the importance or to recognize the meaning of the thoughts, emotions, images, and other sensory perceptions that represent God's presence. Therefore, when I am not able to perceive or connect with Jesus in the upcoming role play, the first intervention that Charlotte will employ will be to coach me to describe everything coming into my awareness, regardless of whether or not it feels important or makes any sense. As you will remember, this will take advantage of the way our brains work best in community and will help me to perceive subtle manifestations of God's presence and subtle content coming from God that I might otherwise miss. Just this one simple intervention will often enable the person to perceive the Lord's presence and to connect with the Lord. Fortunately, for the purposes of education, this first intervention will not resolve the problem in our role play today, giving us the opportunity to demonstrate a second intervention. In addition to simply failing to recognize God's presence, there are a number of common, straightforward blockages that can hinder a person from perceiving God's presence. And most of these can usually be quickly discovered with a simple prayer asking for God's guidance and help. So when the first intervention does not resolve the problem, Charlotte will employ this second basic troubleshooting intervention. And when I describe one of the most common blockages, guarding my fears or blocking beliefs, causing me to be afraid to allow God to be tangibly present, Charlotte will coach me to express these fears directly to Jesus and then to ask Him for help with these fears. Note that my interactions with Jesus at this point would be totally in faith because I would not yet be perceiving His presence in any tangible way. Thankfully, amazingly, just this simple step of speaking the fears directly to God and asking for His help will often reduce the fears to the point that they will no longer prevent the person from perceiving and connecting with the Lord. So now we're going to show you what this looks like. What it looks like to apply several simple interventions to address two of the most common reasons that a recipient is initially unable to perceive and connect with the Lord. To summarize very quickly, Charlotte will coach me to recall and reconnect with a positive memory, to focus on the details until I feel gratitude and appreciation, to welcome and invite the Lord to be with me in the memory context, to ask the Lord to help me to perceive His living interactive presence in the memory context, and then to describe everything that comes into my awareness. And when I pretend that it's not working, she will employ the 2 troubleshooting interventions that I have just described and discussed. We are pretending that I do not yet have any positive memories that include experiencing God's presence. So we will be using a non-God positive memory.
Okay, ready? So the first step is to find a positive memory that you can recall and reconnect with. Since you don't have any memories of experiencing God's presence, we can just start with any positive memory. For example, a memory of a special family Christmas, a memory of a special experience on vacation, a memory of playing with a favorite pet, a memory of an especially positive time with friends or your lovely wife, a memory of a beautiful nature experience, or a memory of thoroughly enjoying your favorite meal.
Yeah, I have a memory that I can use.
Okay, so now I want you to, you got your eyes closed, that's good. Imagine yourself being back inside the original experience and describe the memory in as much detail as possible. Like, let me give you some ideas. For what did you see, hear, smell, taste? What did you feel on your skin? What were the thoughts you were having at the time? And what thoughts come as you think about it now? Even more, what emotions were you having at the time, and what emotions come as you think about it now, or how did your body feel? And then after you've described the memory thoroughly, then I want you to focus especially on the best parts until you feel appreciation and gratitude.
So I'm remembering a time when we were canoeing with our friends up in Minnesota in the Boundary Waters. It was, I don't know, maybe June or something. It was a summer on this river, a quiet day, middle of the day, sunny, beautiful weather, a little breeze maybe, a little windy river, maybe, only 20 or 30 feet wide, so maybe, and kind of a fun adventure through the Boundary Waters wilderness. And we came around a corner, and way up ahead of us, maybe a couple 100 feet ahead of us, I saw this giant snake in the water, and I was like, what? Then I realized, it's river otters, because the way they're long, thin bodies, and when they can kind of look like a big snake. And I got my binoculars, and I was like, there's river otters. And so we were going real quiet up towards them, in canoes, just like you just glide so smoothly and silently in canoes. I love canoeing. And as we were getting closer, I remembered, river otters are curious. And I just had this thought, hey, let's just sing. Maybe if we sing, it'll make them curious and they'll come investigate. I was just like, that thought popped into my head. So I said to the rest of you, I said, hey, let's just, river otters are curious, let's sing something and maybe they'll come to see what's going on. And so we did, and we sang Shine, Jesus, Shine, the first verse over and over again. And sure enough, we just kept getting closer and closer. Instead of running away or diving into their dens, they actually came closer to us, and they were came up within 10 feet on one side, and they would go down and come up on the other side, and they came up right between our two canoes. We might have been 10 feet apart. They came up 5 to 6 feet away between our canoes, and they would look up and just look up at us, and we just kept singing, and they would go one side of the canoe and the other side of the canoe, and then in front of the canoe and the back of the canoe, and for a quarter of a mile they just swam along with us, popping up here and there in front and back, and just every time they would look around and that was such, I remember at the time feeling excited, and we were all smiling and singing and kind of laughing, and just oh wow, can you believe this? This is so amazing. It was fun being together. We were all kind of wow, this is so cool. It was fun singing together, and it was beautiful weather, and no one else there. It was pristine and quiet, and then just think about the best parts. Just that they were so close, you could see their little faces, their little whiskers, hear their little snuffly noises. That was just really cool, and I definitely feel gratitude and appreciation. All
right then. So now I want you to pray something like, Jesus, I know in faith that you were with me when I was there canoeing in Minnesota with those friends and we saw the otters. So I welcome you to be with me now in this memory. Help me to perceive your living and interactive presence now.
Yes, Lord, I do thank you. I do know in faith that you were there. I thank you that you were there, that you are there in this memory. And I do welcome, I invite your presence. I invite you to be with me here. And we ask that you would help me to perceive your living, tangible, interactive presence with me in this memory context.
So then, as you're able, notice and describe everything that comes into your awareness, regardless of whether it feels important or whether it makes any sense. Describe in detail any perceptions that may even possibly be manifestations of Jesus' presence and or interactions with Jesus.
Yeah, I'm really not getting anything. Nothing's really coming. I don't think it's working. I don't think it's working.
Okay. Well, remember how our brains work best in community. So even though it feels like you're not getting anything, I want you to describe whatever is coming into your awareness, regardless of whether or not it feels important or makes any sense.
No, I'm not getting anything. Nothing's really coming to me.
Well, I realize that whatever's coming into your mind doesn't feel important or make sense, but I want you just to describe it anyway, and then we can discern together whether you're perceiving a subtle manifestation of God's presence or whether the process is truly not working and there's some kind of blockage that we need to deal with.
Well, what it feels like is, I feel like I'm trying to guess what would happen. I'm trying to figure out what it might look like, and then kind of imagining that or proactively generating that. I don't feel like anything spontaneous is happening. Mm-hmm. It feels like I'm kind of guessing and figuring out what it ought to look like or what it should look like, and then I'm kind of making that up, and I feel myself guessing and then generating thoughts and images.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel helpful or real. It just feels like I'm making it up, and then I'm distracted. I'm thinking about we need to go get groceries, and are they going to be out of Cheerios again, or are they going to have Cheerios? Or are they going to be out of stock and have to water the plants in the front porch?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so I think you're probably right that there's something blocking the process. So let's ask God for help. What we always do. I'd like you to pray something like, Jesus, what's in the way of my being able to perceive your presence and connect with you? And then observe and describe everything that comes into your awareness, regardless of whether it feels important or makes any sense.
Yeah, so Lord, we ask for guidance and help. What's in the way of my being able to perceive your presence and connect with you? It's like, this is kind of weird, but it's like maybe I don't want him to come, and maybe I'm afraid to let Jesus show up. Does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, actually what you're describing really is pretty common. So let's ask for more guidance and help, and then I want you to try to get words for the fear. I want you to get words for the fear about Jesus showing up and to focus that fear as clearly as possible.
So Lord, I ask for more help. Help me to get more clarity and more focus. Help me to get more clarity about what am I afraid of? It's like I'm afraid that if I let Jesus show up, the first thing he was gonna do is make me confess and talk about all the things that I've done that I regret the most. He's gonna we're gonna have to go look at and talk about, and I'm gonna have to talk about out loud the things in my life that feel the most ashamed of, and that feels like that feels really scary, and like it'll be just unbearably painful and vulnerable and shameful, and it feels like he'll just be angry at me. If I let Jesus show up, he'll just tell me I'm not doing a good enough job. He'll just be angry at me for not being a perfect Christian.
Okay. Well, that's great. So now I want you to express those fears directly to Jesus, like you just said them to me, but just talk to him in faith, since we know in faith that he is here with us, even though you can't perceive his presence tangibly yet. So express those fears directly to him, and then ask Jesus for help with the fears.
Okay, so in faith, like, sort of just kind of imagine in faith he's right here. Okay, so Jesus, I'm afraid, like, before you're going to help me or do anything else, I have to, like, confess all my sins, and like the first thing you're gonna do is make me talk about the things I've done that I regret the most, that I feel the most shame about, and that feels like that would just be unbearably painful and vulnerable and scary and humiliating, and I feel like you're going to be angry at me, like you said, if we don't feed the hungry and clothe the naked and help all the poor people, you're going to, like, throw us into the darkness with the goats, and you told that guy, like, sell all you have and give to the poor, and sell all you have and give all the money to the poor. And it's like there are still lots of needy people in the world. I haven't sold all I have and fixed the whole world, and so if I let you show up, you're just going to be angry at me and tell me I'm bad. And Lord, I ask you to help me with those fears. I feel like I'm afraid to let you be present. So yeah, I don't see Jesus, or I don't feel like I sense any specific response, but it's like the fears aren't as bad anymore. It's like they're not completely gone, but like they're a lot less intense. I just feel like they don't feel nearly as bad or nearly as scary.
All right. Well, so since the fears have gone down so much, or so much less intense, do you feel like it'd be okay to try again, like to go back to the canoeing memory and to try again to invite Jesus and ask him to help you perceive his presence there?
Yeah, I don't, yeah, that feels more comfortable. I wasn't even aware before, I wasn't even quite fully aware of how much ambivalence I had, but now I feel like I could do that, and I feel like there's more internal agreement. And now looking back, I realize that after doing that, I feel like there's more internal agreement to actually let Jesus show up. So yeah, I feel like I could do that again. So just go ahead and do that. So yeah, just even right away, I feel more connected somehow. It feels like maybe I had just a little glimpse, just as I was even starting to just remember it. I feel like I had just a flicker of like Jesus' face kind of smiling, sort of, that he was happy we were having such a good time. Somehow that he was that he likes how much I enjoy nature. Yeah, it's just picturing I was just starting to picture being on the river again, and kind of the grass and the grasses and the rushes on both sides, and the little islands, the little rocks and trees at different places in the distance, and a windy river, and seeing the otters up ahead of us. And I was just even starting to picture that, and I already was kind of sensing I guess Jesus is getting ahead of himself. He's supposed to wait for me to finish my memory and do the invitation prayer. But I'm feeling grateful and remembering, and just how that was so, especially where we were singing and they were coming. I had that thought, maybe from the Holy Spirit, but also just like, hey, all my nature videos, it's like, hey, the otters are curious. It just occurred to me, this is the kind of thing that would make them want to come and see what's going on. And we did the song thing, and they were like, there probably were a couple times that our two canoes were, 8 or 10 feet apart. So they were like 5 feet away. I mean, we could just about have reached out and touched them, and they would look right at you and kind of go. Yes. So that was so cool. So I do really feel grateful there. And Lord, I do thank you for your presence in that memory place, that you were there with us there, and that you are there in the memory. And now I welcome your presence, Lord. And I invite you, I ask you to help me perceive your living, interactive presence in that memory place. And it's not like I see him in the boat, but it's just like we're in the scene, and sort of maybe like halfway there in the memory, he was sort of smiling and like watching, but also like right here, he's also kind of like he's glad to be here with me, with us, and he's it's like he likes giving me. He knows that's special. He knows that kind of a thing, that kind of experience is special to me. And he was like, kind of like when you give a child, or like with our nephews and nieces, and we figure out something they really like, and when we're there with them on Christmas, and how like when you watch a child you love open a present, and they're like, and you know that you've figured out something really special, and how much joy it gives you to see a child open a gift that you know they're going to like. And it's kind of like that feeling from the Lord. He's he loves watching us enjoy his creation. He enjoys giving us good gifts. He's there in the memory, and he's kind of here, just sort of a big smile on his face. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Silly Dr. Lehman forgot to bring Kleenex. Yeah. So initially I was pretending that the process didn't work, and then when we went back after the pretend troubleshooting, I just allowed the process to actually work the second time, which you could see once again the wonderful faithfulness of Jesus and the truth that God is always with us and always wants to connect with us. And when the process works, there you go. Again, the really short summary is God is always with you and always wants to connect with you. If this doesn't happen initially, there's just something in the way. When you find and resolve the blockages, you will perceive God, and you will experience a mutually interactive, contingent connection with God's tangible, personal, living, loving presence. And remember, we have only presented several simple interventions to address two of the most common reasons a recipient might initially be unable to perceive and connect with the Lord. The Big Lion book and the Live Ministry DVDs provide many additional resources regarding other possible blockages and the troubleshooting interventions that can address them. So let me close with a prayer. Lord, help us to be aware of your Immanuel presence. Help us to perceive and connect with your wonderful, living, gentle, strong, loving, compassionate, comforting, friendship presence. And if we are initially not able to perceive your presence and connect with you, help us to remember that you are always with us and that you always want to connect with us. And help us to find and resolve whatever's in the way so that we will be able to perceive you and to establish an interactive connection with your wonderful, living, gentle, strong, loving, compassionate, comforting friendship presence. Amen. Amen. Love you, miss you, bless you. See you next time.